see hand up for Member Sibley's. Member Sibley's?
Yes, Chair. You're very low.
All right, I'll ask the
I don't
technical.
know.
I'll ask the technical team to.
You're very low.
Okay, I'll ask the technical team to see if they can make
Yes,
some adjustments.
it is perfect now, Chair.
Okay, good.
It is not.
Good.
I'm hearing you loud and clear.
All right, thank you. Any corrections or amendments to the minutes? If not, move for the adoption of the minutes. All right. Can I get a seconder, please?
I second.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Let us move to item 6, which is new business, which is to review the review of challenges and lessons learned from the 2022 population and housing census. I think we will proceed. Any opening remarks by the FS, and then we'll move to the team from, you can introduce the team and then opening remarks.
All right, thank you, Chair. Good morning. Just to indicate that with me this morning from the Statistical Institute of Jamaica is Ms. Carol Coy, Director General, Mrs. Lisha Delate Bodier, Deputy Director General, Mr. Donovan Dixon, Director Corporate Services, and Jessica Campbell, Director Research, Design, and Evaluation. I also have Mr. Michael Parker from the Ministry of Finance and Public Service. That's it.
Ms. Coy, welcome to the PAAC. So any opening remarks, and then we'll open the floor to questions from members.
Thank you, Chair. What I just wanted to do is give an overview for maybe persons who haven't time to go through the report. As you know, the census is an important data collection activity that takes place every 10 years. During this year, during the 2020 round, which is an international activity, data collection, we started planning from 2017. The work actually started from 2017. Data collection started in September 2022 on a phased basis and was slated to be completed within 4 months. This census was different from the others in the fact that we were now moving to a digitally enabled census, so it would have been collected by tablets, and all the attendant activities also would have been digitally enabled. What happened this year is that we did not complete data collection in the 4 years, in the 4 months, sorry, as was planned. And as you would have seen from the report, our plan was to basically employ about 6,000 census takers and approximately over 1,000 supervisors. And what that meant, would have 1 census taker to an ED, which is the enumeration district, is an area with about 150 to 200 dwellings. One of the problems we ran into was we were not able to attract the levels of employment as we would have happened, and that had a significant impact on it. Statin also faced issues as an organization in attracting some posts that were critical to the operation of the census. What we need to also note is that Statin was not the only, Jamaica was not the only country who faced this. The global community had an issue with the 2020 round of census. And as you would have seen from my note, some of the meetings coming out of the UN Statistical Conference this year noted the problems that we had. There was COVID, which in the case of Jamaica impacted our training. because the training was to have been face-to-face. We had to rethink that in the light of COVID. We went to virtual training. Given what eventually occurred, what we can we presume is that the training itself was not as we would have wanted, the virtual training. We had actually increased the training to 8 days this round, compared in previous censuses, the training was about 5 days. But because we were moving to tablets, we knew it would take a little longer. So we moved to 8 days, but somehow we still had issues with the training from what we can see. The other challenge we have, as you would have noticed, is, as I said, recruitment and training, difficulty in recruiting census takers. And one of the things we need to note is that the unemployment rate in Jamaica has been going down. And so we found it difficult to attract the numbers, especially in urban centers and in the tourism areas of the country. And the reality is, when we spoke to a number, because a number of persons would have applied, they would maybe go to the training. They found the thought of traveling, walking around and collecting. It was not an attractive thing for them. And so I think the difficulty, they face it as a difficulty. We also faced issues of response from especially some gated communities, with the proliferation of gated communities. And it's not just a Jamaican situation. A number of countries would have highlighted this. Once Statin realized that we were facing these issues, we would have put in measures to counter some of these. As you see, we would have transitioned some of our enumeration districts to web questionnaire. This did not, it was not as what we had hoped. The take-up of this was not as we had hoped. We moved to using teams rather than a single census taker to an enumeration district, to teams. So these were some of the challenges also that we would have faced during the census. We also, as an organization, when we realized some of the challenges, we reached out to our international partners, statistical partners. We have, as an organization, Statin works with our international partners despite any statistics that we're working, whether it's CPI, whether it's labor force. So they would have been on board with us from the start, even with the Caribbean and other countries. So we have been working with them, because as you would have known, we did not enumerate as the whole of the country. A census has never enumerated 100%. That I need to point that out. But we did not reach in numbers which we had hoped. So working with the statistical communities, because of the challenges of the 2020 round, they have been developing systems to help countries to ensure that we can get a count of the population using statistical methods, as I would have highlighted here. I know the question is going to come up of the remuneration, so I'll bring it up here. The payment to census takers it's specifically based on certain criteria. You have to complete the questionnaire as required. There's an additional document that is called a visitation record. How the process, it's a two-step process, as I would have explained in the document. Once you are finished, it goes to your supervisor. Your supervisor is supposed to review and ensure that you have completed the questionnaire properly. Your visitation record, which is a quality check on your work, should be completed, and then this is submitted to head office. When it goes to head office, we had a team of nearly 100, what we call headquarter users, now going through them. If the questionnaire did not meet the quality, there are certain criteria. And it's not every question that we require, but there are certain questions that are required. The visitation record must be, then it would be sent back to the census taker. The problem is that we found there were gaps between when the census taker submitted it to the supervisors and when the supervisors would have reviewed it. When it comes to head office, we would also send it back to the supervisor. So there was that issue So what we did when we realized what was happening, we would have put in place certain measures. One of them is consistent communication with the census takers, because using the tablet, you can use the messaging services on the tablet. We would have had meetings with what we call the management in the field. Because of the nature of the census, you cannot manage directly from head office. So we would have created management levels in the field, and we would have been working with them to get them to deal with that. When also we realized that this was not moving as fast as we would have, in-house we started ourselves to liaise directly with the census takers. So we would have had what we call tech support officers. Some of them are based across the island, would directly contact the census takers when they realize that there are issues with their questionnaire. They could remote into their tablets and they would work it through. In addition, what we have had to do at head office, we have had to take on the role of the supervisor so that the census taker can complete and can get paid. But this, would have taken longer because a supervisor will have about 6 to 7 interviewers working with. When in-house, we now have to deal with all of that. It's a much lengthier process. And so that is what we have been going through at Statin and we have been working through. And this for us, the issue of ensuring the data, as I said, the international bodies, we had one meeting with them earlier this year, a face-to-face meeting. They are supposed to start again with us in September to go through the data. And the reason why we have to wait until September is because they are working through, this group working through the Caribbean, Latin America and the Caribbean and helping other statistics offices. So September is the earliest date in which they can come to Jamaica. So that is what it is that we are doing. And I'd like to reassure the committee that Statin is an organization that prides itself on data and how we work with our data. We are fully trained, we are all qualified, and the team, I can tell you. And so for us, ensuring that the data at the end can stand up to scrutiny is what at Statin we stand behind. I don't know if the Deputy Director General wants to add anything that I've left out.
All right, thank you, Ms. Coy. Members, I open the floor for questioning. You have your, would you like to say something? Member Morrison?
Yes, is it time to ask questions or raise concerns?
Sure, you can proceed.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Good morning, members. When we look at some of the issues raised, such as that emerging from the reality of the proliferation of the gated communities, issues with persons not cooperating, persons leaving the job, among other challenges that I've read in the brief, what are the implications for the integrity of the data? And a second concern that I have, as it pertains the difficulty with accessing gated communities and persons not cooperating with the process, what is the future for census gathering? And finally, I'm of the view that there are some of the challenges that we could have anticipated, and I'd like to hear more about some of the mitigating steps that were taken. Thank you, Chair.
I didn't hear the last question clearly, but I'll respond to some of the others. The challenges you're seeing in persons not responding, and this is why we say we have asked the international community to assist us. What you must remember is you're collecting data for an enumeration district, and as one of my directors always say, birds of a feather flock together. So if you collect other information on the enumeration district with statistics, you can make some inferences. But we are using techniques to ensure that we can give the count for the country. One of the ways in which we try to get as much data, to help the census takers move much faster, we would have moved from that long questionnaire that we had, and we went to a short form, which we thought would make it easier for the census taker to move through the data. This we would have discussed with our international partners, because we wanted to make sure that we didn't leave out any of the main indicators that would help us to get demographic information. Yes, the short form, what we'll know is that some of the indicators we might not be able to give at the detail level which we did in the past, such as enumeration district, but we will still be able to provide adequate data on the census. For moving forward, I'll ask the Director General, Deputy Director General, because she has been at a number of these international bodies where we have been focusing on the problems and how do we move forward in the next round, which is the 2030 round of census.
Thank you, Ms. Coy, and thank you for having us here to the honorable members of the House. All right, so with regards to the future of censuses in Jamaica, and generally, the discussion around the 2030 rounds of censuses has already begun, in the sense that we are looking at the lessons learned from this round of the censuses, and we are already planning what needs to be done differently. So some of the things that we have noted is that we have to leverage technology in a different way. So there has to be a rethinking, a rescoping of how do we promote things like the web census so that persons can self-enumerate. Additionally, too, we're looking at shorter forms. So as Ms. Coy would have said, we started off the census with a standard questionnaire because the census is typically more than just a count, right? It also captures other social and demographic information. However, when we realized the challenges of the 2020 round of censuses with the issues with low response rate and low completion rates, we actually pivoted to a shorter form. So the shorter form will have to be a feature of censuses going forward, where we focus on the count. The issue of data integration, looking at geospatial information and how we can leverage that, working with our utility companies. So for example, we've looked at the case of Uruguay, where they worked with their utility company in promoting certain counts. There are several initiatives that we're currently discussing internally, and that over the next couple of years, while we start the planning for the 2030 round, that we will be piloting. So those are just some of the things that we have been looking at for the next census. Thank you.
Chair.
Yes, go ahead.
Just a follow-up. I'm very satisfied with the response. For the second question that I asked, I'm very satisfied. But I'm going to go back to my initial question because I think there may be some misunderstanding. This process has taken quite a while, and we are, well, I am satisfied with the justification that has been, the justifications that have been placed before us. But the question that I am pushing is this. Given the wide range of challenges, right, given the fact that persons left the job, there were individuals who did not cooperate, and so on, what can we say about the integrity of the information? So when we have that final document, what can give us that assurance that this is near to as accurate as we could be, notwithstanding the challenges faced?
Hello. All right. Thank you, Member Morrison, for your question. If I could just assist the DG in responding to this question. So one of the main implications of the challenges of the census is that we won't have as disaggregated data for some indicators. So for example, one of the questions that we cover on the census is ICT access and use. And we usually present that at the ED level. Given the fact that that question was dropped from the long form, it's not on the short form, then we can only report that at a more aggregated level. So that's one of the implications. In terms of the quality of the data and the final count, because of the challenges of the census, what we have been introducing is significantly more data validation techniques, which is what our international partners are coming here to assist us with. Right? So we are doing additional checks. So with this census, the fact that we were digitally enabled, we can say exactly where our census takers have gone and where they have not gone. So we know the coverage by ED. And we can, with the support of our international partners from the United Nations Statistics Division, the Statistics Division of ECLAC, from our partners in CARICOM and the UNFPA, we can apply additional techniques, geospatial data analysis, integration, and other techniques to impute with a very high degree of certainty the undercoverage, and also using the additional data validation techniques. And this is something that we will definitely detail in a technical note to the census, and also that we will have dialogue with our local stakeholders, because for the census we actually have a technical advisory committee that comprises local researchers and academia. So this is something that we will ensure that we are very transparent with in our process, so that there is broad understanding of what the techniques are and how they are used and how they can be assessed independently of what we will present.
Thank you.
Member Jackson.
Thank you, Chairman. Good morning, Ms. Coy and your team. I have a few questions for clarification, essentially. Based on the welcome overview that you provided. You said that the census are never 100% of everybody. What's the norm in terms of the percentage of coverage from a census, say over the past 3 prior census, which is, as indicated, a 10-year exercise?
All right. I think the last one was about 80.
80?
80, yes, around 88, around that. Prior to that, it would have been higher, because you'd have realized as we get more into the modern era, the response tends to go down. And this is why we are now we are in this post-census assessment, and Statin has always done a post-enumeration survey. And what that post-enumeration survey always provides Statin with is what is the undercount and the undercoverage, and how do you use statistics to ensure that you get this to the total population.
When you say get to the total population, could you elaborate on that? Because okay. Let me preface the clarification I'm seeking. For me, and I think the average person, the census is to provide a literal count as against an opinion survey by marketing companies and so on, a literal count of persons in the population, among other data that you would have collected in the exercise. So you're saying that if I was to extrapolate, if there is 1 million persons literally in the population, based on an average of 80%, it would have been 800,000 persons actually counted. Is that it?
All right. When we are doing our assessment, it's not at a national level. So we work by what we call enumeration districts. So what the post-enumeration survey does is we would have done a sample of the enumeration districts to see how good that coverage was. And then you would do an estimation at the enumeration district. So you wouldn't be doing an enumeration you wouldn't be doing all of Jamaica. It's a statistical technique that is used. And so this is how, and as I think the Deputy Director General mentioned, it is something on that level that we'll be doing, but it will be much more, it will be larger than, say, the last time. Because the last time we would have gotten, these are the number of persons we have counted. When we did our post-enumeration assessment, it would have said, based on the sample we did not capture so much percent across certain the EDs. And then at the ED level is when you would do that assessment and imputation.
Okay, so Ms. Coy, is it reasonable for me then to say the census does not represent an actual count of the population, literal count, but rather a statistical deduction of what the population is?
No, I don't know if I would term it that. The world over, rarely does any country get 100%.
No. I'm speaking about the exercise itself, not what the norm is globally, but in terms of a census. Because I will tell you, most persons who are not adept of the science involved convince that the census is a literal count. And just a point in reference, we in Portmore always believe that the last census that was taken in 2011, that says 191 people in Portmore, we just dismiss it. Because when you look on the electoral enumeration by constituency and use an average of how much persons in a household, the numbers just don't add up. And then we had one big argument with many about what the population is that we are catering for. So it's against that background why I ask the question, because I've experienced many persons who proceed with that assumption. So what you have clarified now is that we can debunk this notion that the census represents an actual count of the people in the population. If I'm wrong, correct me.
I'm going to ask you to use Ms. Coy's mic because they're not hearing you clearly from.
My apologies. All right, thank you for your question. So the intent of the census is the aim is to count all persons who are usually resident in Jamaica, but there are always going to be persons who are either not available, refuse, or for whatever reason they are not reached by a census taker. And this has always been the case. This is always the case for a census. However, it's not as simple as just saying, oh, we are not counting the entire population. A very critical part of the census is also assessing the level of undercoverage. So with each census, which is one of the reasons why Ms. Coy had said that the visitation record is a critical piece of the census, because what that does is it helps us now to identify all the buildings in the ED, whether they're occupied or not, whether they're residential or commercial, and it also assists us with the undercount. Now, once we are clear on the undercount, and for this particular census, given the challenges that we've had, we're using additional information. So we're using satellite imagery, we're using a lot of additional information in order to ensure that we're able to critically assess objectively what the level of undercount is. Particularly too for the census, we geo-referenced all the dwellings. So we know where we went, we know who we spoke to, and we know whether there was a response or not. So the census has never counted the entire population. However, it's not as simple as looking at, for example, the electoral roll or other administrative data sources. We don't just confront the census data with one piece of information. We confront it with several pieces of information in order to arrive at what we can stand confidently behind and calculate what the level of undercoverage is. So it is a lot more complex than just saying.
Okay, I'm pretty much gathered that. A couple other questions again for clarification. For the census, or say current one, since there's some level of incompletion about it, you started preparation in 2017?
Can I just, before, because you gave a figure of 80% enumeration. What is that 80% referring to? That's in the last
census.
Yes.
2011.
I think it's around that.
No, because coming back to the original question from Member Jackson and also Member Morrison, speaking about the integrity of the census itself and the difficulties that you mentioned, that you have not been able to enumerate the numbers that you are expecting. But you refer to that 80%. Member Jackson, we're under the impression that it was every Jamaican or a percentage of the population that has been questioned. We're now learning that it is not so. It is a sample size that you're actually using, for the want of a word. But you refer to 80% enumeration. Says that 80% of the population, 80% of your enumeration district, what is that 80%? figure. Of, yes.
Interesting.
Okay, that 80% is of the total population. As the Deputy Director General said, we would have started out hoping to do everybody. But at that point, you have to cut off. If persons refuse, but you have to now impute for these persons. So it would have been at the population throughout
So
the country.
you would have enumerated 80% of the population?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, but no, Mr. Chairman, your question you asked is very interesting.
Yeah.
Because 80% of something, some number, it can't be an infinite number. It must be some definitive number, whether 10 million, 5 million. So is it 80% of, I don't even know how to, no, really, 80% of what? How do you arrive at 80%? Because you have to have another number to come to the 80%. What is that other number and how you arrive at that number?
Okay, so what we would have done, we would have counted the population, and then we would have done the post-enumeration survey, and we would have estimated what we did not count, say, out of an ED. So when you imputed for that you didn't count, you realized, based on your percentage
okay, so you
undercount.
estimate what you never count, and then to arrive at some,
yes, because you would have done that.
some virtual number.
Just to clarify, the 80% that we're talking about is of the previous census, because we're still processing this one. So we haven't given you a code for this one.
No. I mean, Ms. Coy, we were talking about the previous census.
Not the current.
Yes, not the current. So, but I just need to know the 80% of what figure it is that you were referring to. So what would make the census, what percentage of persons to be enumerated that would make the census, want of a word, credible when presenting it?
Statistical science.
So with regards to the census, there isn't a standard percentage. There's no consensus on that. What is usually assessed is how effectively you're able to assess the undercoverage. So it's the quality with which you're able to assess the undercoverage and the ability that you have to impute. It's, I'm trying to explain it in a simple way, so please bear with me.
You have the time, my dear.
Yes. So there is no standard to say 80%, 70%, or 60%, right? There is no standard internationally. But if you are able to reliably estimate or identify who you have not counted, and with sufficient degree of confidence, once you have looked at your data from many different angles. So we're looking at it from the count, we're looking at it from our admin data, from the building footprints, from the many different ways that we're going to be looking at the data in order to arrive at a reasonable degree of certainty, which is usually within a 95% confidence interval.
So
it's about a 95% confidence interval. So being able to assess 95. The undercoverage with a 95% confidence interval, and that's standard for statistics.
So if the figures that you got out of the last census, 2011, 2012, and you have only enumerated 30% of that number with all the difficulties that you have, you would have been able to use that to come up with credible data?
So we don't just look at the last census. We also have to look at what
I'm speaking about the numbers enumerated.
Yes. So we're looking at multiple information. So one of the things, for example, that we're looking at is the building footprint. We're looking at all of the development that has happened since the last census, whether they are occupied or not, whether they're residential or commercial. We're looking at the migration, the inter-country migration. So how many people have moved from rural areas into urban areas. So there are several factors that we're looking at in order to come out with this. And one of the things that we're doing with our international partners, we are locally doing the estimation. We have our international partners also looking at this, and then we're also confronting our different estimates, ensuring that we can reliably and reasonably identify where the gaps are, which areas we do not have additional coverage. Because one of the things I think Ms. Coy would have said in our earlier press conference on the census is that we identified certain areas where the undercoverage was quite significant. And what we did was we sent out some of our permanent members of staff to go and quickly enumerate those areas because we realized that the undercoverage in that area was too great. So these are some of the things that we have been doing in order to ensure the integrity of the data.
Chair, if I
Go ahead.
just a few quick, no, and I will just run through and then you can pick up after that. Again, drawing from the report you gave, Ms. Coy, you said there are a number of, well, you started preparation from 2017. Scheduling or projecting to start when?
The census should have been 2021.
2021, beginning or the end of 2021?
It would have been April 2021 was our start
April
date.
21 was the targeted.
Yeah.
And it was projected to last for 4 months, if I recall correctly. Okay. You actually started in October 2022.
September 2020,
September
2022.
2022. So September 2023 would have been 1 year, which would have been 3 times the projected time. So after the first 4 months, based upon the response you have to date, then you would have known you have a crisis. You know, if I'm expected to finish in 4 months and after 4 months I'm 10% of my target, I'm in a crisis. So some alarm signals, I presume, would have been sent out. We are in a crisis. I say that against the background of one of the things you mentioned, which was a challenge, is filling of posts. And I used to hear in the media such reports about unable to fill posts and salary and all of that. So from the experience in the recruitment prior to the commencement in September 22, when you're doing the recruitment, you'd have got the feedback of people not taking them up, either because the money not enough or they're unavailable. And we will be told that we're in a market economy, and so wages are also part of the market. In other words, those who pay more get better response than those who pay less. So in the preparatory phase leading up to September 2022, Statin would have been aware that there's a crisis. Positions can't be filled. And they would also be aware of what was the response in the field to people not taking up the employment assignments that were being recruited for. So I would like one question in that regard. What were were the alarm signals detected, and what was the response or responses to that which you were having? That's pre-commencement. Now, upon commencement, using the 4 month as the work period, one of the challenges you mentioned of is gated communities. And I'm quite familiar with that challenge because in my own neck of the wood, the police themselves report that issue of the police able to access some of these gated communities. And I raise it to ask the question, if that was a real challenge, which is especially in the urban centers, was that raised so that some intervention could be made given the importance of getting the data in these communities? In the case of the police, I've been having discussion with our Minister of National Security to look at that, because I don't believe police should have any problem going any community to investigation and to carry out any action. It's a state function that they carry out. Your function is a state function. Accurate as can be data is critical for reasons which you would be eloquent in speaking about. So what was, if any, alarm was raised about that? and what was the response if it was raised, because policymakers, quite frankly, can't solve problems that they're not aware of. You know, I always say to public servants, you are the operators on the ground. You know the challenges more than us who are at the policy level, even at the ministry level. Your field people can better advise on that. Lastly, for now, is the EDs. You said, based on the challenges we just talked about that you were having, you had less EDs completed. You were able to do less EDs and that was targeted. Of those EDs that you actually did, what is the level of completion in them? And that would be for now, Chair.
Okay. All right, thanks for those questions. So the recruitment of and training of census takers would have taken place starting in March of 2022, because one of the things you have to bear in mind, you cannot train people too far ahead of data collection dates, so it would have started. So when we started the recruitment, we had, as I would have pointed out in the report, I think we got enough persons who said they were interested. The issue, though, is that once you get these persons, they would have done a test, an online test, and so what you started to do is weeding out these persons. Then you would have invited them after an assessment to a training. The training, as I said before, lasted 8 days. You started going in, that person started dropping out because the 8 days was just too much for them to attend that training. Once you now get into training, this is where you now also start having reductions in the numbers, because some persons, I think it's in the training that they realized the level of work that they would have to do, plus some just did not meet the requirement of it. So you had that, that dropping out. When we realized that we were not having, because training should have ended, I think, in about August of 2022, when Statin realized that it did not have enough, we went on an additional round of training. I think about 4 or 5 additional rounds of recruitment and training. So we would have been, that was an additional cost to us, and that was an additional extension. So I think we went up until about March of 2023, recruiting and training. I think when the ministry realized our problem of maybe not attracting, there was a 100% increase that the ministry provided funds for, so that we could attract, we thought the funds would have attracted persons. What Statin did, however, was that additional fund, we say we would pay you that additional fund once you have finished the work. And we hope that that would have been an incentive to get the census takers to quickly complete their work. So we would have realized, and we would have made, had discussions, and the ministry did support us in that by giving us a 100% increase in the payment to census workers. I'm not sure how effective that was. Maybe it still was not enough for them, or we just did not attract the numbers that we thought. And one thing we must bear in mind is that, yes, you can attract so many persons, but usually we try to put census takers close to where they live. So you might have an overabundance of persons applying for the census in a particular area. But if you're going into St. Andrew, it doesn't make sense if you have a lot of persons in, say, Clarendon applying to bring them, because the traveling that you have given them would not make sense to move them into Kingston. So those are some of the nuances that we would have been dealing with regards to the recruitment. With the gated communities, I think we
But
tried.
Sorry, Ms. Coy. Before you move there, and just on Member Jackson's, really the crisis that you would have seen from early. Because by your own report, you said that of the 14,642 individuals that were identified, only 4,500 was taken from the pool. So before you even started the census in September of 2022, you would have seen that you're basically in a problem in having persons to go out there. So, you know, what then mitigating factors were then put in place? Because from day one, you know you had an issue with census takers. That 4 month, if you went out there with those numbers, that 4 months would not be possible, right? So what then was then put in place by your organization itself to deal with that shortfall that you're seeing? Because you, out of the numbers, you'd have only gotten 30% of the numbers who originally applied. So the crisis was there from day one.
As I said, the issue was to expand recruitment to try and see if you could attract more persons. Because I think we even lowered some of our expectations about the persons that we would get to try and get a larger pool, and then we would use the training and close monitoring to see how. So that was our thing, and the additional remuneration we thought would have been an incentive to pull more persons to it.
What are the experiences from previous censuses?
Okay.
Yeah. What were the experiences from previous censuses vis-a-vis this one? Why? I mean, yes, I understand the issue of COVID, but the ones before that was paper-based. You mentioned in here the issue of the ability to use the tablet that is provided. What was the experience of previous censuses? Was it why you would have gotten even 80% enumeration from it compared to not being able to even find individuals in this one?
Okay, in reviewing our past reports, what we have noticed is that the issue of employees, census takers, has always been an issue. It has always been an issue that has been highlighted. What has happened, I think it has worsened with this census. And this is why I think, and it's not just Jamaica, I don't know if it's a generational issue. I don't know why. I can't say. What it is, though, is that it is one of the lessons and one of the ways in which we have to think of censuses coming up, that we have to reduce our dependence on having workers go out to, especially using these large numbers of persons. So that is one of the lessons learned, and that is why, as the Deputy DG alluded to, how do we work with having persons do their filling the questionnaires themselves by using the web. It's a process we will have to focus on, and I can tell you the world is focusing on it and moving away from having so many employees, because it has gotten worse over the years.
But I mean, just a suggestion, I mean, just even at this time of the year where Ministry of Local Government, the Ministry of Labor, all different institutions employing young persons for the summer, you know, you have the Heart Trust. I mean, I understand the difficulty, because if you still have 700,000 plus, which is not looking for work, and this is employing persons, I mean, then there's a deeper root cause of why it is that people are really not really looking for work, and why it is they're not responding. I wouldn't think that you wouldn't have a problem before. But is it an indication of our education system? Is it, what is it? I mean, you know, there has to be a deeper analysis of what is causing us not to be able to get persons to do these census. Because I am sure that even when you do the web-based, the response is going to be challenging too. So where do we go from there? Do we start earlier in sampling it? What is it? So that's why the question asking, what are the mitigating factors and the things that we are going to try that is going to be different, that is conducive to our society? And that is where I would love to hear us, where we're going with that. Because even though we might do sampling like what is done somewhere else, but is that conducive to our society here in Jamaica? Member Sibley, you wanted to ask, your mic is on.
Thank you, Chair. And let me thank the team for your report. I have some questions, but the first one I want to ask is the percentage in terms of your work that you have done. What is the percentage that you have covered so far? So that I can ask the other question. That answer will help me to coin the other questions that I do have.
As I would have said earlier in another report I give, what we focus on now is the coverage. We are still in processing and analyzing the data, so we will not be able to provide information on the population coverage. What we have said is that we have gone into about 74% of our EDs. And that is what we have been focusing on, looking at the EDs that we have covered and to see where there is. So that is where we are with that coverage. But we are in analysis mode, we're in processing and analyzing the data, so we will not be able to provide information on population counts.
And earlier I thought I heard you said that the data collection, the expected time for the data collection was 4 months?
Based on our original plans of having one interviewer per ED.
Okay, and what was the overall timeline for the project itself?
That's the original timeline, which is 4 months.
The original for data collection or for the project itself?
For the project itself. I got the 4 months for the data collection, but what I want to know for the project itself, to the point where you would have given a report.
Usually it's about a 5-year process because it starts first with what we call the mapping. So we have to go through the country and create the EDs. Well, we don't create them from scratch because we'd have had EDs, but because of the issue of building, so you'd have had more, so we would have to do that. So it would have started from that, then there would be training and recruitment, there would be data collection, then there would be data processing and analysis and dissemination.
But I'm trying to find out from you, the timeline. Is it, you said very, in a way, 5 years. Is it 5 years? Is it 6 years? Because I want to get a sense of where we are within that timeline. Have we passed the timeline, the overall timeline? I want to get a sense because it will help me again to coin the other questions that I have.
Yes, we would have passed the timeline because remember the original was to have data collection in 4 months.
Yes, but the overall project, I know you would have passed the timeline. You see, I'm thinking this through a project management scope, okay? And I know through a project management scope, if it is that one element of the project would have surpassed the timeline, it doesn't mean that overall the project might be in danger, okay? So I'm looking at it through that scope, all right? So that's why I'm asking overall, what was it 5 years? It started in 2017, and it should have ended at what point where we get a report? Can you just tell us that?
Okay, so the original project data collection was slated for April 2021, and it would have also been at 4 months, and we would have, our estimate would by 2022, the end of 2022, we would have come out with all our reports.
Okay.
So that was the original. But as we would have said, COVID pushed it back 1 year, and then the data collection issues again would have delayed the finalization of the project itself.
Yes. The other question that I have now is, was this project undertaken under a project management scope at all, where you would have had a work stream kind of situation? You have a project manager, you would have a steering committee, and there would be a separate identifiable group of persons other than you, the senior management, who they would report up to make certain strategic decision, having seen where the challenges were. So I'm asking, was that undertaken, or was it just that the management team engaged in doing all this process without an expert project manager?
All right, so we at starting, it's a project. At starting, any activity that is not part of our regular work program is treated as a project, and it would have gone through the timelines of it. As I said, there was a governance structure for the census, and there would have been a census steering committee, there would be an external committee, there would be a technical committee. So there were committees that were created. Usually for the census, in this census, we try to get a project manager from the start of the census. We were unable to attract a project manager. The reality is the payment, the costs that persons, what they were asking, Statin could not afford that cost. We eventually got a project manager on board, but that would have been during the data collection. And that project manager was to look at data collection and try and ensure that we remained on track and what we were doing. So that was a temporary thing. Statin did not have a director of censuses at the point, because the reality is the posts at Statin, they are highly technical and specialized. We now have a director of census in place, but prior to that, with the salary levels at the time, we could not attract it. So what we had to do at Statin, because you didn't have this in place, we had to put in place the resources and the structure to enable us to do it. And as an organization, we came together under this, and this is how. So we would have been monitoring it. It was a project, so it would have had project timelines. It would have had all the issues. So we know what would, the issues that would have happened. But what the data collection, I think, is one of the major challenges, not keeping on track. And as I said before, it is not just in Statin. Worldwide, data collection has been an issue for this round of censuses. And that is why we would have called in the international bodies. Because when we realized the root was happening, we realized that let us call in the experts and let them advise us as to how we move forward.
And this is kind of reminding me of system development. And because I've heard it when we were at a stage where the world was developing systems, and they tend to go the route that you are saying the world is going in implementing these kind of projects. And the implementation of these kind of projects without having the expert project manager being recruited and the importance of it being started at the critical point where you have to implement the project is one that I think you need to consider going forward for your next project, because it really takes away from the management team. When the management team gets sucked in to the operationalization of certain things within a project, then you then realize that you can't make certain decisions in a strategic way. And I think that is, I submit, that is one of the opportunity for improvement going forward. With regards to the census takers, the persons who were supposed to go into the field and were sent into the field. Your report on page 2, it is the last paragraph, starting from the penultimate sentence. The number of census workers employed was further reduced as several persons declined the job offer. There was therefore a shortfall of field workers at the start of data collection. It also said that, a little before that, that after the training, you had reduced staff, but what the number is missing. I see where you started with 4,500 census workers prior to training, but I'm not seeing what was the number after that. Can you just... No, Chair. I am the 14,600 applied, but of that applied, approximately 4,500 census workers were selected. After training, were selected. After training for onboarding, persons were selected based on their performance, whether they obtained pass grade. But there was a reduction here. You said that the numbers of census workers employed was further reduced. I wanted to get a sense of what was the absolute number. It's very generalized in your thing. Do you have the numbers, and can you provide it for us?
I don't, but I would, based on the norm, it would be about, based on what we knew came on board, about 4,000 would have been on board. I don't have that number here. I just wanted to clarify something that you said prior to that. The issue of the project manager, it was one of the, because after each census we do a debriefing and a report, and it was identified as having a project manager as critical. So we started out even before, because in doing the census, we do what we call pre-tests and pilots. We just don't go into a census like that. We would have pre-tested, we would have piloted the things. So we wanted that project manager on from the pilot stage, and this was where I said we had issues. And I want to acknowledge... I
want to delve into that issue, if you don't mind. Mm-hmm. You said you wanted a project manager. So, and you said that there was a challenge in recruiting one because you, and correct me if I'm I'm misquoting or not paraphrasing it correctly, that you were not able to attract the project manager, and I'm taking it because of the salary that was offered. Did you communicate this to the Ministry of Finance that this was important, and the project, you have started the recruitment process and you're meeting up on this challenge? Did you communicate this to the Ministry of Finance with regards to having a project manager really starting the project?
We did not approach the ministry because the salaries that they were asking were sometimes twice what the Director General was getting. So this was the issue. It was way out of what we thought. It would have been much higher.
That's the cost of project management.
Yeah, well, that is true.
Project managers, to be honest.
Okay. What we have found now is with the new compensation, we have been able to, say, attract a director of censuses. So that has alleviated, some of the issues that we have with the attraction of that.
So the director of censuses is competent in project management. Have they, part of the certification that the director has, do they have a certification in project management? And if not, is the institution prepared to get that training for the person? Because project management is a skill by itself. I can tell you, it's really a unique thing that needs to be learned and applied.
Okay, so the director of census is a requirement for the census on the technical side. We would not be expecting the director of census to be the project manager. Statin is in the process of trying to get a reorganized structure, and coming out of things like the census, what we have recognized is one of those posts that we need is, given also that we do other projects, is to have a project manager on board and staff that can assist us. For the census, however, with whatever way you go, we would have to get on a specialized person for the census.
Okay. So, with regards to where we are now, right, I heard you that there has been some collaboration internationally, and that is very good because all the experiences coming together will be a good thing for Jamaica. And therefore the question is, when do you expect that we will be closing out on this project, given all that you know?
So the team from the UNSD, ECLAC, World Pop, and UNFPA, they are starting their work here in September. Given the volume of data processing, that should take around 5 to 6 months for processing the data. Thereafter, we will produce the report. So we're looking to have the reports on the census completed in the fiscal year 25-26.
So have you finished collecting data now? Or stopped? Yeah.
So,
Yes? Yes, is it?
Yes, contract workers, they have stopped.
Yes.
We're still doing the assessment with our workers, but it has stopped.
Okay.
okay. You said,
Here?
what?
Not you yet, member. I've seen your hand. After member Sybil's, member Morrison, then you can come. Oh, no, well, yes, I will.
I just want to get a clearer picture. You said should and look to have. I'm not sure that persons watching, persons listening, certainly for me, it doesn't give me a sense that it will happen. You know. So, and I'm not going to ask you to pin you down to say it definitively. But if you could, after you leave here, you could do some proper assessment, you know. I guess you have to probably corroborate with your international partners and inquire of them how long, given all the limitation and the challenges that we have, it will take, so that we can communicate to the public in a more definitive way that this is based on what we have and the work that we have to do. It will take until this to produce a report. Thank you.
So you can appreciate that this is uncharted waters for Jamaica, and our estimated timelines are based on the experiences of these teams in other similar countries of similar size with similar levels of undercoverage. There are also factors outside of our control, as Ms. Coy would have said earlier. It's not only about our availability, it's also about their availability. And that's why, at this point in time, so it's not that we don't know what the process is, but we have to leave some room for error, because Murphy's Law has been in full effect. And we know that whatever can go wrong will go wrong. So therefore, we have to leave, we have to leave some, yes. Yes.
Before you come on, Member Morrison, Ms. Coy, Member Jackson had asked a question about how it is the gated communities. On that issue, which you did not answer. So I'm just giving you an opportunity to.
Okay, we knew before going into the census that there would be issues, because we face it in our surveys. And we would have done some prior to the census. We would have made some contacts with some agencies and some bodies that we thought would have made it easier for us. There are some gated communities that we went into. I don't want to give the impression that all gated communities. So some were very cooperative. They would have contacted us once we wrote letters. But there are some, one of the issues you face is, how do you find who is the manager to get to when you go to these, when the census taker went to these communities? These don't have any security guards. These have electronic gates, so there's nobody to talk to. And so those are the ones, I think, where we had the greatest challenge.
Follow. Ms. Scott, just to make it clear, my asking the question is really to place any blame or onus on Statin or your census takers. Is really to get a greater sense of the challenge existing. Because I mentioned before, you're not the only one. That law enforcement, I have gotten that report too. So my question was to get a sense of the actual experience to inform what needs to be done going forward for critical state exercises like the one that you are carrying out. So now I ask you what the experience, for example, is it, on a scale of 1 to 10, what it is in this or that area? Is it the absence of physical persons present to provide access on a scale of 1 to 10? How much was that? In the case of resistance, for you to enter the premises on a scale of 1 to 10, what it is like? To get some real, information as to what the reality is out there for entities like yours. So that was the background to the question, knowing that it's a challenge in other areas. And to ask you or invite you to make suggestions or recommendations based on some of those hard experiences that your team would have encountered out there.
All right, so in terms of the actual numbers, that would have to come later, but I can tell you what some of our experiences have been. So there were some communities that we were able to, they actually proactively reached out to us. They said, hey, we're here doing a census, we would like our community to be enumerated, and they were very proactive. There were others, though, that we had a lot of back and forth. So for us, fortunately, we have a Statistics Act that says that for the census, you are legally required to complete it. And we would write to some of them, we'd get some pushback, and then we cited the legislative obligations, then we would get in. So it lengthened the process, and during that process, some of our census takers got frustrated. Additionally, too, as Ms. Coy said, especially those communities that do not have anybody manning the gates, it's quite difficult because to identify to whom we should address the correspondence is often quite difficult. It's not sufficient to leave it in the mailbox at the gate because nobody reads those correspondence until years later. So it's not sufficient. So identifying the contact persons is a real challenge. I know since our experience, we've built some stakeholder relationships because I know that there is some work undergoing with, for example, REB and Strata Corporation, and they're being restructured. So there is opportunities there for stronger collaboration for the next census. But these are some of the things that we have been looking at and working towards better partnerships and building stronger partnerships so that at least we are able to reduce the number of persons that we can't find to whom we should address the correspondence.
No, Member Morrison first. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. All right, so I started asking about the mitigating steps. I also asked about the future for census taking. Chair, what I want to know, and I hope that they're in a position to give even a part of this information, in comparison with previous censuses that have been done, what are some of the emerging trends, patterns, generational shifts, factors that we now have to take into consideration on how people live, how people behave, that may inform the future of census taking?
All right, so there are several emerging trends that we have identified. There are several emerging trends that we've identified, and let me just take them segment by segment. So let's start with the respondents. We realize that socially our society has changed. Persons are increasingly concerned about privacy. For example, for us, something that is very strange for us, a new question that gives us trouble is your age. That used to be a standard question. Now that is a question that we have an increasing item response rate on. People don't want to disclose their age. So we're realizing that socially there's a different appetite towards civic responsibility. Additionally, too, we realize that with the security concerns, what you have is persons are less open to responding to somebody knocking at your gate. Just think about it. If you're at home and a stranger comes up to your gate, are you going to open your door, right? You're always going to be second guessing. So these are some of the lessons that we have learned. With regards to staffing considerations, again, with waning interest in civic responsibility, the fact that census taking and data collection is very hard work, it's not easy. What we find is that the people who are best at data collection are aging. They're getting older. So it's one of the reasons that as an institute, we've been looking at making our questionnaires and our instruments leaner, shorter, easier. Additionally, too, in terms of emerging trends, we know we have to move towards leveraging technology. We know that we have to move towards data integration. It's a topical issue. How can we leverage existing data sources to supplement some of our data collection? How can we introduce new statistical techniques in order to move away from the traditional surveys? So generally, we're moving towards more administrative data. And we are also increasing and improving our partnerships with other state agencies who have administrative data. So these are some of the things that we have been looking at. One of the things that we know for a fact is that 5 years won't be enough for the next census. So we actually have started talking about it from now, because that one is going to be harder, right? So these are just some of the lessons that we have learned. We've already done a couple debriefing. We're constantly in dialogue with other countries to find out their experiences. What worked in your country? What didn't work? How can we come together, brainstorm, and come up with better ideas? And as I said earlier, we're going to start testing some of these approaches with some of our surveys to come. So we're innovating as we go along. And it's one of the things that the restructuring that we're doing will facilitate.
Thank you, Chair. That is the aspect of it, the sociological aspect of it that fascinates me. Thank you, Deputy. I'm interested in that response.
A curious question to your team. Those at the low end of the socioeconomic spectrum strata, how would you compare their disposition to respond and cooperate to your census takers than those in, say, the middle or upper and upper? Huh? I know I might put you on the spot, but you can appreciate. You see, pardon me, Mr. Chairman. You know, one of the purpose of these meetings is to use it as a forum to garner solutions for problems that we have. It's not just to criticize or hammer anybody. It's in search of solutions. And we're always in need of solution as we evolve as a society. And not to say the solution is going to come in here from this meeting, but to the extent that the meetings are public, it engages the public around the challenges that you would have highlighted so that some solutions can rise to the surface. In many other societies, and I think you alluded to it in your presentation, there is greater level, in some societies, a greater level of voluntary, probably it's a voluntary cooperation, right? In other words, people cooperate with the state in providing information and data, and then it lends itself to be one more comprehensive and more accurate. Where you have a greater resistance to provide information, it makes the information gathered probably a bit less reliable, and in the minds of those who are going to use it, a bit less credible. And so we want to see how we can overcome those challenges that the data use can be as pointed and valuable. And allow me to be parochial for a moment. In Portmore, you know, all of us laugh at this 191,000 that we were told in Portmore. And if resource allocation is going to be on the basis of population, then, you know, we're in serious trouble. So it is against that basis I asked the question. I can remember at one time it was a big issue in the discussions in Portmore about what our population size, what Portmore size really is. You know, we claim one thing as political operative, but then other entities claim otherwise. So it has real day-to-day value.
Yeah.
All right, so we have found in our household data collection activities that there is an inverse relationship between income and response rate. We find persons at the lower end are more amenable, persons at the higher end tend to be more concerned about privacy, and making contact with them is harder. So our census takers will be out there and call for the whole day and nobody goes out, even with our interviewers. What we find works with upper income or higher income individuals is building relationships. So if they know who is coming, then they are more likely to be responsive. So we have been working on trying to build better relationships with that aspect of our community, of our society, because we don't want to exclude them, right? And it's very important for us to understand the entire picture. But increased privacy concerns are a real issue as income level increases. On the issue of Portmore, I think we have different definitions of the boundaries, and that's why we have different numbers.
The boundary, we can always extrapolate from what boundary you have, even if I have some other one from what you use. Because that happens too in other areas, like in the health services and in the JCF data too. So we can always extrapolate if we know what the respective boundaries used are.
Earlier, you mentioned the legislation, that the legislation actually provide assistance with regards to entering gated communities. Right. Do you find that the legislation that you currently have is helpful? And the second part of that question, during your experience, is that because you mentioned it as a challenge, did you seek or sought to use it? And does it have adequate sanction to assist? Those are my questions.
Okay. What I should point out, statins legislation is quite old. We are in the process of trying to get the legislation amended, because the fines in it, I think like a number of legislations in Jamaica, really doesn't make sense. So it is one of our targets for the next financial year to have at least for the Ministry of Finance to start dealing with it and to have get it amended. It helps in some instances. The problem at statin is sometimes we use it as moral suasion rather than a final thing to say we're going to carry to court to it, because there's a fine to it. But what we try and do is use moral suasions to get persons to respond to data, because I think you'll get more out of that than having this big stick over it. But the legislation is there. But as I said, it needs to be amended, and we are working on that.
Yeah.
Next time, just say you're going to take him with you.
No, I'm trying to get an understanding. You said the legislation seems to be aged, right? And need reviewing, and I'm getting that in its entirety. But at the end of your answer, you're saying, we don't wish to use the legislation as a big stick because we will get more out of using moral suasion. So is that part of the legislation that I'm speaking to? Does that section need amendment? Because while I accept that moral suasion is always best, I want to know if that section that we are speaking to needs some reviewing, and you would recommend that it be reviewed so that it can be taken much more seriously. That's what I'm asking.
Yes, it's one of that section. It's that section in the Act that will also be addressed.
Oh, sorry, you could know. Yeah, just a follow-up on that point. What I appreciate from your response about the moral suasion member is a young lawyer told me some years ago, which was one of my students, it's always better to get a settlement than a good judgment. And the argument behind that, even if you have the judgment being the legislation, the processes and the time involved might not pay off. But if you can get the person to voluntarily agree on an agreement that can be resolved right away, you're ahead of the game. So I'm interpreting that to mean if moral suasion can get you to achieve the cooperation, then, because the legislative route is going to take some time, forget the compliance. So I just mentioned that. But lastly, to say though, team, these legislative amendments, one of the reasons why these discussions are critical, because we know that a number of our legislations are aged, and the age of them make them worthless. People just easily incur the penalties rather than comply. It's easy and it's insignificant. So that's why it's important for you to highlight these weaknesses, and weaknesses doesn't say you're criticizing anybody, but just the passage of time and the relevance of numbers, of amounts, that these are brought to the fore so that the ministry can become proactive in a timely basis in making the amendments that are needed to make your work be more successful and effective when you go out there. So I just want to, not only as it relates to the question my colleague asked about those in the census takers, but in your general execution of your task.
Chair, can I respond to that? Is that we have been working with the legal department of the ministry. So we have been in dialogue and they have made some recommendations. So we have been working with the ministry on this.
I have a few questions I'd like to ask. You had mentioned earlier that the data collectors are out of the field now. Are they all paid? Remuneration taken care of? If not, then where are we in that process?
Okay, yes. Not all census take workers have been paid. And as I alluded to in my report, there is a process for them to be paid. So until their work, until we have gotten that check, because we have it's a digital system. So for example, a significant part of it is what we mentioned, the visitation record. And if we cannot reconcile that with the questionnaires, then we have difficulty paying them. So what we have been doing, as I said, we have been calling them directly, working with them to get them, because they're out in the field. So it's difficult for us in-house to sit down and say, okay, this dwelling remains, this dwelling is here, this dwelling is here. So we have been working with them.
Right. So how long now have they been out of the field? And give me an example. If one of those data collectors had everything in place, how long would the process take for them to be remunerated?
Okay, at this point, once the work is finished, it takes about, once everything we have satisfied that everything has been corrected, for the census taker, it would take maybe another 2 weeks, because it has to, the system will have to tell us, yes, this questionnaire has been completed. And then there are some checks, because it has to go to payroll. And there is some checks that we would have done. Some of the census takers' work also undergoes some audit. So when we look in our system, if there are things that look not, we do some audits on it, and that might take a little while, because what we might do is send someone in the field to ensure that the census taker did in fact go to that dwelling. The census supervisors know, those we know, because they can only be paid once all the census takers that report to them their work has been signed off.
What's the age now? What, meaning the time frame of those that are now owed? What's the duration of this, let me use the word liability to these workers? And when do we expect that a final decision will be made, be it that the data is rejected or them being paid? Can you just identify yourself first, please?
Sure. Good morning. I'm Jessica Campbell, the Director of Research, Design, and Evaluation. Also a part of the team that assists with compiling the payrolls for the census workers. So in terms of wrapping up payment to census takers that are still outstanding, as soon as we have reconciled their work, they are paid.
No, I understand that. I'm trying to get an understanding of the age. When did they come out of the field? When did the process start in the verification and an expected decision being made, be it that they're paid or not?
So payments have been ongoing. Data collection started in September, and checking of the work started in November. So we were paying at 2-week intervals.
That's November of
2022. So we've been paying since then. So as soon as persons would have completed a set of questionnaires and synchronized, we check on the completeness of the work, and then would pay the monies that are due to them on an ongoing basis every 2 weeks to the census takers. So main data collection ended in December 2023. So the census takers would have stopped working in December 2023. Some of them have been paid, some of them in full, some of them not altogether. What's left now to be paid are the persons whose work need to be completed, finalized, reconciled.
what percentage?
So we have maybe we have paid about 60% of the persons already. So we have about 40% left to reconcile.
And, but the process has taken what? If you said you're out of the field as of December 2023, we're now in the end of the 7th month. How long do you see the process continuing? Because there have been complaints out there by persons who have, and this in itself, if you're really looking at gaining workers for the next census, this in itself may just be an issue for the duration of time that you actually take to settle on the job done. So how long do you expect that this process will continue for you to be able to have a final settlement? Because for someone to go out there, probably this 40% will not even return again or have an interest in going back into the field, and you already have a problem. How long do you expect that this process will take for a final settlement?
All right, so we understand that the census takers cannot go back into the field, and we know the lag in payment is an issue and persons are disgruntled, right? But we also have to ensure that we are paying for questionnaires that are due payment. I cannot say but that by December, well, what month is this? So I won't say in the next 3 months or in the next 2 months because I am not sure. So for example, let me give you an instance, right? Ms. Coy has been speaking about completion of questionnaires and the importance of the visitation to validate what the census takers do, right? So we have instances where, say for example, the supervisor would not have completed work in an ED for a census taker who finished working from about June in 2023. It is left now to our in-house team to take your work. You've been done working since, you came out of the field since 2023, June. So we now have to take your work and reconcile as best as possible so that you can get paid.
And
But it's
I'm
not,
asking the question again, how long is it going to take the Statistical Institute to do that reconciliation so that all outstanding can be settled? I understand the difficulties. It's either you're rejecting the data, you're accepting it, but after where you can now settle, if there's outstanding data to be gotten and you have not gotten it over the period of 7 months, then what is the next step so that these individuals can either know that they will be paid for the work that they have done or not be paid for what has not been done?
all right, I'll hand over to Ms. Coy to give timeline.
Okay, so I think for us in starting, we will have to decide at what point does, after we have tried our best, that these questionnaires cannot be paid for. Because for most of the issues, it's for questionnaires that we have. So we have to complete it, I would say, because if the persons are here by September, we have to finish before that because those data cannot go into the system that we are working with. One of the things I need to point out also is that at this point, we are only paying if you return your tablets. So even though we have signed off, we are saying to census workers, you must return the tablet before we give you that final payment. So what we have been finding is a number of census takers are now ensuring that they return it, because that's what we're holding on at this point for some census takers.
And how many of those tablets you have outstanding?
Maybe about 2,000, I think, around that. I don't have the figures on me right now.
So basically half of what went out?
Yes, about around that.
Right, so, but I'm trying to get a better understanding also of the number of individuals or census takers that have not been fully remunerated.
The issue is that we pay per questionnaire, yes. So I suspect most...
Or what percentage of the questionnaires that came in then that you're having an issue with?
This is about, we have about 20%, about 20% I think we're still struggling with.
20% of the questionnaires. So,
yeah.
And again, it comes back to an original question that was asked about, because we're really having a challenge then, I mean, in the sense of one, the data that comes in, two, the amount of data that you can use, three, the amount of enumeration that you have done from start. So if you have 20% of that data that you're still having a problem with, that hopefully not have to discard, then will that compromise the report that needs to be compiled?
Okay, so the questionnaires may be okay. So the issue we're having is just reconciling with the visitation record. And I can tell you that because we are dealing with them on a one-on-one, and that is why it has taken so long, because the supervisors were the ones who should have ensured that the questionnaires, because sometimes there's nothing wrong with the questionnaires, but it's how do you link that questionnaire with a visitation record? And so that is what we're trying to focus on now, is to link it. Because we have been insisting that we know they need to send in the tablets. Once the tablets come in and we sync them, we are now finding those visitation records, even though we had asked them to, as soon as you do the visitation records, you need to sync that information. So once the tablets come in, we sync those questionnaires, we sync the tablets, and we're now finding some of those missing visitation records, and we're working with that.
Mr. Chair, Ms. Coy, quite frankly, the whole thing seems a bit messy. You finish data, you mean in your entity, finish a data collection exercise in December last year. Now is the end of July, 7 months later. This is way too long. You have to operate with some ultimatum. Otherwise, in 2040, we'll be still going through this exercise. So, in the same way that you had a projected 4-month exercise for data collection, you must have some set period for the census takers to submit. If they fail to submit, then you have certain action that you take thereafter rather than wait indefinitely. Because what I hear a lot, you're waiting on them to do this, you're waiting on this to do that. Suppose they never come. The whole thing will never end. So you have to set some timeline for each phase. So the field workers have to submit claim for payment and turn in tablets. You set a time, 2 months, 1 month, whatever the time. I'm not prescribing it, but you must have some definitive timeline. Number 2, if the supervisor has certain responsibility to reconcile some information from the field worker, the supervisor too must be given some deadline. If it is that the supervisor cannot complete that reconciliation, that task, because the field worker is, you must have some next immediate consequences that flow. But what I sense is that everybody's been left. 40% is a lot of people.
It is.
It's almost half of the crew that is unresolved, and 7 months after. This should have been closed within 3 months after the field exercise is completed. Everything should have been long closed, and more than double that time. So as of now, Madam Director General, you have to institute some clear, definitive timelines. If persons fail to turn over the tablet which belong to you, you declare it stolen because they are keeping it against or without your authority. Anybody that have anything without the authority of the owner, they are illegally holding it, and you have to take action.
All right.
So that is my plea. And one last question I had to ask, in the midst of answering, you can give it. Was there a set budget for and what it is, I don't know if it is in the report, a set budget for the census exercise itself? 1, what was your starting budget? And 2, what was your ending budget that you were working with for this exercise? And lastly, I must tell you, Madam.
No, can you just answer that before?
Well, it's really a comment I was going to make, and I'm through, really. The whole thing is a bit messy, if we are frank. It's messy, and it undermines the credibility of both the institution and the exercise itself of the census. And yes, whatever happened has happened already, but for the remaining shortest period of time, all the steps that can be taken has to be taken to restore the credibility both of the institution and of the census exercise. Because if we don't do that, with all the gospel we might preach, it means little. And the people outside who are going to use it, it is as good as the credibility that it carries with it. So I just want to leave that with you. And we need it. Statin is a vital institution and the work that they do. So we can't afford it to be impaired.
Okay, with regards to the budget, the ministry over the 5-year period approved a budget of about $4.9 billion. So far we have spent $3 billion on the biggest portion of this would be for data collection, which would be the biggest part of the budget. With regards to the whole payment issues, we are no longer dealing with census supervisors. So we are not waiting on census supervisors. That is out of we have decided ourselves in-house to deal with. So census supervisors, we are no longer dealing with them, but we have made the decision that until we have finished all, because there was census supervisors know what their responsibilities are. So if in-house we are the ones clearing up that, then they would not be paid for that. So that is clear. We acknowledge that the process of payment has taken longer than it should have. The system we had built is, as we said, it's dependent, because it's a digital system. If the questionnaires have not reached that level that the system deems that it is completed or it meets all the criteria, then this is the issue that we are facing. And as I said, we have decided in-house, Statin has put in-house, where we ourselves are clearing up these. But my point is, it takes longer, because a supervisor would have had about 6 to 7 interviewers working with, and it would have been easier. Now, in-house, we are the ones doing it. And we don't want to penalize census takers whose work was impacted by a non-functional supervisor. So that is why we are taking this.
Thank you, Chair. So I would not agree with my friend, Member Jackson, that it's messy. I would save that extreme word, in my opinion. But I will agree there have been some missteps, some challenges that we need to overcome for the future. And while I say for the future, I segue into maybe going forward, the Statin could collaborate with community leaders such as members of the clergy, university, in getting persons within their community and space. Because I heard you earlier where you would have had an over application of persons within urban area, and you'd have wanted a more wider spread of persons who are competent to apply. I know that and if you could have this done, the data collection going forward during the summer holiday, that break when university would be on break, a longer break, and it could be very attractive, because some of our students go overseas for the Earn and Study program overseas in order to meet their obligation to go back to school. And I'm thinking you could tap into that workforce going forward. Madam FS, I don't know how often you would have had meetings with Statin or the persons who you would have designated to have these meetings. But might I recommend FS that going forward, as the Statin team has agreed, even not agreed, but they said earlier that in their review meetings, they see the need to have a project manager, but not just a project manager, mind you, but that a structure, a project management structure, because having a project manager is one thing, but to have a project management governance system is different. And you would have at the top, at the apex of that, the executive steering committee which Madam FS would be a place where you would attend those meetings or you designate to ensure that there is some accountability in terms of noting when things are going wrong and there can be some serious question asked. A lot of problems were with the recruitment, and when you have a project management structure, the in-house HR doesn't deal with the HR. You really have a work stream. You have a human resource work stream, which is headed by someone who is not focusing on the entities, other human resources matter. And that's why my recommendation in the next phase that we have a project management structure in order to hold people accountable at a much faster rate than when we are at the end of the process. And so the question, Madam FS, the lessons learned now, 2030 is soon. Have you had any meeting and engagement as to how you're going to go forward with the financing and not making the same missteps that we would have encountered?
Okay, so just to address the financing first. On the financing aspect, there has been no financing issue with the census in the years since the census should have commenced. The activity was funded with more than has been utilized. We have had to cut the budget that was provided as the year progressed each year. So there has been no issue with the census, and we expect that moving forward, this will be the case for our national census. No, the Ministry of Finance has not had a meeting on how we move forward with 2030. We are trying to wrap up 2020. We hear all of what has transpired, and certainly our engagement with the international community will assist in how we do our next census. But your indications are noted.
Can I just ask a final question? What is it? Was there remuneration for a questionnaire?
For the census taker, the household, there's a payment of a household questionnaire. Thanks. So the household questionnaire is $400 per questionnaire, and $800 per individual questionnaire completed. So when they go into a household, there's a household questionnaire, and that is $400. And then there is an individual. So for every individual in the household, you do a questionnaire, and they will get $800 per individual household completed. In addition, they are given a traveling allowance, and this traveling allowance is to negotiate an ED, and for the urban, for the census taker in the urban is $56,000 per ED, and for the census, for the traveling in the rural area is $61,000 per ED to travel that ED.
And that is paid, that's paid at the end of the period, meaning the traveling, how is it dealt with?
Yeah, a half is paid once we realize that they have started. There's some criteria for you to start the payment, because what you don't want is to pay persons and then they leave.
Yes,
So that is it. And then the household questionnaire is based on the completed household plus the visitation record.
And this, what you're quoting was after the 100% increase?
Yes, this is what would happen after the 100% increase.
So what you used to pay them before?
It was half of that. It was 200
Yes,
per
400,
household questionnaire and 400
400,
per
yes.
individual questionnaire. And then the census supervisor, they get 170,000 for the completion of the supervisory zone. So they are not paid per, they have ensured that all the work for the census take.
Can you say the 40% that is owed, approximately how much is owed?
No, we would have to do that because most of those that we say they are owed, they would have been paid some portion already of the
of the outstanding amount that's owed.
That information, we would have to get back to you with that information.
All right. Members, any other questions? Your Honor? Just in summary, I mean, from day one, we saw that there were going to be challenges. And, part of the reason that why we ask agencies like yours is that out there in the public, there may be an impression that is left out there. It is for us to delve into that and to see what some of the issues that are facing, projects like yours in doing the census. The adage, we keep on doing things the same way and expecting a different result. Coming out of COVID, seeing the amount of persons who you would have engaged and the amount who would have started the process, you could see that there were going to be challenges. We're hoping that the next time around, and I mention it in what is conducive to our society, because it's not one suit fits all. And I find that from where we sit here, there are many instances of a changing society and how it is that we change with them and not expect that they're going to do something that other generations did. And I think that we're slow in moving in that direction. Yeah? Hence the problems. And how it is that you engage others in taking up the census, as I made mention earlier, and Member Sibley's also. Why not utilize the summer workers that government is still paying? In many instances, we can't even find job placements for them. So, how it is that we do things differently. I'm happy to hear that we have not gone over budget with this. But again, it is how that we efficiently complete this. There has to be a cutoff time, as we're seeing, and communicated to those who have not yet been or who are still outstanding. I'm hoping that those who are part of the process, those 2,000 plus tablets are returned so that we can validate the data on it. Because this is not just something on a remuneration, but it's for our national good. Communication, I guess, could have been much better in the public's view, in where we were, where the difficulties are, and what needs to be done. But let me thank you for coming to give your side of the story and for the report itself. But where I started off, doing things the same way and expecting a different result, it's evident that we have to change the way that we do things if we want a better result in this instance. So, Madam FS, Madam Coy, and team, let me thank you, and happy emancipendence when it comes. Thank you. Members, are there any other business? We will look at the date. We'll ask the clerk to look at another date. We have already signed off on a schedule. Look at an available date once we have an indication of when Parliament will resume, so we can write to that MDA to appear, and that will be circulated. As we said, we want to try and do as much of the schedule that we have approved. Thank you. That we have approved, and see if we can get the work done before the Christmas break itself too. All right. So let me thank the members who are present online and physically in the Parliament, and enjoy your break as best as you can, and happy emancipation and independence. I know it's a work time for us too, but do all the best to yourselves and your families. All right, the meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.